Good morning, Dan and Amy.
A little pitchy, sorry.
AM 560 Signature Bank Business Tour brings us to Strawberry's Custom Counters in Addison, Illinois this morning. It's been great fun to broadcast from this wonderful facility, going concern, Strawberry Custom Counters in Addison.
Yeah, going strong for 50 years, family-owned business.
Yep, absolutely.
And then besides these beautiful countertops, they have top-of-the-line flooring that I'm going to get my little meat hooks on before I leave here.
You're trying to negotiate some deals after you've read Art of the Deal. Trying to put that to practice, so that's a wonderful thing. Speaking of business in Illinois, the governor gives his budget address today, and we had a very spirited conversation with Kristen McQuarrie about the state of the state yesterday. Kristen McQuarrie will be in for you on Monday.
Oh,
so
that's the lucky lady you've chosen.
That's sparring will continue, when you're out playing golf or doing whatever
Scuba
it is you
diving,
do.
saving the world, saving the fish.
But in addition, the pages of the Tribune in the recent days have featured an op-ed from Diana Rickert, who's the Vice President of Communications for the Illinois Policy Institute. A tough, I would characterize it as a tough but fair op-ed with respect to Governor Rauner and what he's been saying and doing versus what he needs to say and do today. She writes in the closing paragraphs, Rauner should use his budget address to lay out a bold, if difficult, plan to once and for all solve Illinois' problems. If he does, we'll know that the inspiring Bruce Rauner is back. If instead we get expressions of confidence in career politicians to craft a quote-unquote solution on the backs of Illinois taxpayers, well, in that case, we'll know who really got shook up in Springfield. Zing. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Diana Rickert, VP of Communications for the Illinois Policy Institute, with which I'm also affiliated. Diana, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me this morning.
So the two Rauners that you describe and then you present in summation at the end, those last two graphs that I just read, what's the difference between the two? Give us the argument in terms of who Bruce Rauner can be and maybe who he has been more recently.
So the Bruce Rauner on the campaign trail ran these commercials about eating career politicians for lunch and taking a sledgehammer to the system. And that was the guy that everybody got excited about. He turned out Republicans who had stayed out of the election for a lot of years because they were tired of, the rhinos that were running the state. He inspired independents, and he inspired Democrats. In fact, in 20 House districts and 10 Senate districts, people voted for Rauner, but they also voted for a Democratic state legislator. And so that Rauner was, a tough guy, warrior Bruce, who was ready to take on the system. The guy that's been talking for the past few weeks and few months as this, so-called grand bargain is being talked about, a.k.a. just another tax increase is being talked about, is a totally different guy. He says he doesn't want to get in the way, let them work out their deal. I'll be here if they need me. And the they that he's talking about are the same politicians he said he was going to eat for lunch when he was on the campaign trail. So he's totally retreated and is leaving all of the budget and what should be reform conversations to the exact same people who created the problem. It just seems like such a dramatic shift from who he said he was going to be and who he has been over the past few weeks.
Yeah, campaigning's a lot different than governing. So in this third budget address, what do you want to hear from him, but what do you expect him to say?
Well, I'm hoping that he'll kind of snap out of what he's been in for the past few weeks and return to being, strong Bruce with the sledgehammer, Bruce, the warrior, the guy who was going to take on the system and wasn't bought by anybody. I'm the guy that nobody sent, the guy who would point out the problems in both parties and really talk directly to the people about what actually has to happen in Illinois to solve the problem. So that's who I'm hoping we'll see today.
And the Illinois Policy Institute put out a proposed budget that would constitutionally balance the state budget without a tax increase. Governor Rauner certainly hasn't embraced that. He barely acknowledged it when he was before the Tribune editorial board last week. But many legislators have endorsed or embraced at least some component parts of it. It's the sense from Illinois Policy Institute that what we're looking for is just basically what you said, Diana, with the Bruce Rauner that was the that was the candidate, the maverick candidate, if you will, and then who spent much of the first 2 years of his term saying, look, I'm willing to deal on revenue in some manner, but we have to have structural reforms in exchange for that. We have that change the long-term trajectory of Illinois. So he doesn't. The Illinois Policy Institute. You are not calling on him to adopt what your organization produced wholesale, but go back to what he was promising for the last 3 years up until recently.
Absolutely, and I mean, even if he does, accept some form of revenue for change, for big reform that the state needs, we've proven that it's not a revenue problem in Illinois. A tax increase is not necessary. You can fix the state without a tax increase, and we'd argue that you have to fix the state without a tax increase because our state is shrinking, our state revenue is going down, people are leaving. We have major economies in the state, major towns that are already in recession. But even if he says, okay, I understand the reality that the General Assembly is controlled by Democrats and they'll never go for, IPI's plan wholesale, then he needs to set some standards for what that kind of budget looks like. Instead, the stuff we're hearing about in this grand bargain is fake property tax reform, fake term limits, just like lip service buzzwords that are out there that people care about. And he needs to step up and lead. There's a big difference between essentially a governor who is a hospice caretaker of a state that's in decline and a leader who's doing everything that he can to turn us around at every cost.
Well, and it's interesting you point this out because also today, Connecticut Governor Daniel Malloy is giving his budget address. And
I think that's going to be a lot different than ours.
Well, he's a Democrat.
Yeah.
Connecticut is right behind Illinois in terms of largest unfunded liability, pension liability. And what Malloy is expected to propose is essentially a pension push-down idea that has been advanced by the Illinois Policy Institute here to have local communities pick up a third of the liability for the teachers' retirement system in the state of Connecticut. So if you can have a Democrat governor, and by the way, that's interestingly, he's getting pushback from Republicans in his state legislature. So it's not even a partisan issue. It's as you see from kind of the Connecticut example versus the Illinois situation, it's a political courage, whether it's lacking from Democrats or lacking from Republicans.
Right. And what's really interesting about all of the proposals we have in our budget plan is every single one of them has been proposed as legislation in the past, and many of them have been proposed by Democrats. So it's not like our proposal, which shows how you can balance the budget without a tax increase, is, some ivory tower libertarian pipe dream that, would just make, Illinois a totally extreme state. No, these are things that other states are doing that Democrats have proposed in recent years. Even Madigan has proposed some of these things, of course not in good faith, but these are all doable. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said this is just a question of political courage. And right now what we see in the General Assembly is the audience that people want to cater to are the special interests, the lobbyists, and their peers, not the 12 million Illinoisans who don't deserve another tax increase.
Now, you mentioned we can balance the budget without a tax increase, but that means we'd have to cut spending. And where would we cut that spending?
Well, I'd actually say we need to reform spending. So, it's everyone always thinks it's are you going to cut or are you going to raise taxes? We advocate the third way, which is you change how you spend your money. So, one of the things that we do is we enact a property tax freeze for 5 years. And in exchange for that property tax freeze for 5 years, we give local governments a lot of power over how they spend their money. We alleviate state mandates. We reform collective bargaining so that they can act, a local manager in a town or a village board can actually negotiate a contract that works for them, not just a cookie-cutter contract that's what they're allowed to do under state law. Workers' comp reform. These are all part of things that will help us get back in line with what other states are doing, but they change how we spend money. And, of course, there are other things like, finally closing down the pension system. We propose a plan that's constitutional to close down the pension system, by the next, 20, 30 years. because we know that it will never, ever, ever work. So we move all new employees to a 401k. We give current employees the option to join a 401k voluntarily, and eventually in the next 30 years, everyone who's in the system today in the pension system will be phased out, and we'll have an entirely defined contribution retirement system. So it's just a lot of common sense things that help us spend the money that we have more wisely. And
it's
stuff
best.
everyone's doing at home.
Yeah, best practices from the business world, you think, would be wheelhouse for a governor who comes from the business world. We'll see what he has to say this afternoon. Diana Rickert, Vice President of Communications for the Illinois Policy Institute. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.